Okay, so now we're going to focus only on the other side. We're going to focus only on the other extreme, this interpretivist paradigm. And I will start with discussing one of the core assumptions of this paradigm, which is the interpretation of what is reality, what is real. In positivism, the assumption was that reality exists there and we were to discover reality. Things are real there and we want to discover. We need to be smarter to discover and to quantify, to test, and all of these things. In interpretivism, we assume that reality is actually constructed through interpretations and social interaction. Without that, this reality doesn't really exist. That sounds a bit strange. It's a bit um, kind of odd to think that nothing exists, but that is the very extreme version of interpretivism, that everything is socially constructed and psychologically constructed, and it requires interpretivism. In the end, as I said, it's a mix of things, right? Like in practice, especially in business, we are never at the very, very extremes. We are somewhere in between. But for teaching, it's important that you learn the extremes, and then it will be easier for you to differentiate where are you. In the end, you are never, never at the very end. You will be somewhere, because I think we are not psychologists or we are not sociologists, so we need at some level of reality, real reality at some point. But anyway, the interpretivism paradigm assumes that reality is socially constructed, is constructed through interpretations. Without interpretations and probably social interaction, reality wouldn't exist. Based on that, the idea of understanding and interpreting is more important than discovery, because we assume that reality just not exist over there. It needs interpretation. So then the focus is to understand or to study that interpretation. As it says in here, the methods that we use in this paradigm focus on interpreting the data rather than quantifying. We don't want to discover, we want to interpret the data. So maybe it's a bit confusing now because maybe it is, but I will give you some examples later on. But now trying to compare these two extremes, I will go through different levels, and then I will give you a few concepts that are very important. But um, first of all, regarding reality, in positivism, we assume that reality exists in there. It exists there. In interpretivism, no. Reality only exists because we perceive it socially or psychologically or in a way, but it exists because of perception. So these are two big differences regarding reality. Second, the idea in positivism, we focus on discovering that reality. In interpretivism, we focus on interpreting those perceptions. So now it is connected, you see, like reality simply exists versus and reality simply exists with the idea of discovering that reality versus the other. Reality exists with because of perceptions, and we want to focus on interpreting those perceptions. If we move forward, uh, we we also come to this idea of what how should we do this research? How should we study reality? In positivism, we want to be very objective. We want to be far away from the data. We want to not interfere. Again, this is maybe connected to how you learn science in high school. To be in a lab where you can control everything, and that's the best way to test for something. That is connected with positivism, coherent with that. Interpretivism is different. The researcher should be embedded in the whole process. The interpretation of the researcher is very important. If the researcher thinks something is in a way, and he wants to move something, or he wants to, I don't know, make changes in a way, that is very important. The interpretation from the researcher is connected with this interpretivism paradigm. And then if we connect that with the methods, in positivism, we try to use quantitative methods. We will talk about methods later in the lecture, but we will try to use things that we can quantify, test, and all of these things. In interpretivism, it's not like that. In interpretivism, is not about quantifying, it's more about understanding. Like rather than from 1 to 10, how do you feel? It's really how do you feel or what do you feel? It's more like that's the question, or why do you feel like this? So again, I'm trying to explain the most extreme sides of this positivism and interpretivism, but later I can give you more examples regarding methods. Finally, as I said before, in positivism is used in natural sciences and interpretivism more in sociology and social sciences and in business as well. If we follow here in accounting, in this course in accounting, it's also connected to the fact that accounting can be seen as an economic process, like just trying to maximize to be more efficient. That is one way of looking at accounting, or the other side of accounting, trying to understand what power relations emerge, how you control people, how do people react to accounting. You have the two paradigms in accounting. I don't know if we are lucky or unlucky, because again, if we were economists, we will only care for positivism. If we were sociologists, we'll probably only care for interpretivism, or like 90-10. But in accounting, I think it's like 50-50. Some accounting problems are very economic problems, and that they belong to positivism. Other accounting problems are more about interpretations. And now I will introduce a few concepts that maybe you have never heard, so maybe it's important that you take note. But they are connected to all these things that we have been discussing, also the table from before. And I will start with something that is called ontology. Ontology is a branch of philosophy that aims to understand what is reality. Ontology is that. What is reality? So again, maybe it's a bit repetitive, but the ontological assumption of positivism is that reality exists independently of anything, and objectively it exists. Why is this important? Because in your research problem, when you are thinking about what do you want to study, uh, there can be a case, and you need to be conscious about this. Are you studying something that is objective and that you want just to discover? For example, is there a specific calculation that you want to discover in order to show something like a different type of cost? Like imagine when they were designing the activity-based costing, there was a question of discovery. What is the procedure to calculate costs based on activities? That is the question, very objective, very into reality. So they were trying to study a reality of accounting that is very objective. There is a tool, I need to find it. The opposite. What if we have a reality that is constructed by interpretations? In accounting, you can also find something like that. For example, what are the consequences in top management team after the implementation of the balanced scorecard? That is a very complex question. It's not about discovering what happens. It's about how it happens, why it happens, who is involved in a way. It's a kind of complex question because it's also linked to this assumption that reality is not there just to be discovered. That accounting reality is actually constructed by interpretations. Again, don't worry if you're confused. With more examples, I think it will be clear. Let's move to the next step. The next step in this philosophy road is called epistemology. Epistemology answers to the question, what is valid knowledge, or how do we study that reality? That is what epistemology aims to answer. What is valid knowledge, or how do we study this reality from ontology? So in positivism, we say that something that is valid knowledge is something that comes from measurable data, quantifiable data, something that we can measure. That is the idea of the epistemological assumption of positivism. That knowledge is valid if we can quantify it, if we can test it. If we cannot, it's not valid from positivism perspective. But in interpretivism, it's different. We we are okay if we create knowledge that comes from subjective interpretations. We don't really care about objectivity. So That is because we want to study a reality that is based on interpretations. That's why we need subjective data. So I don't know if you are seeing now, but it seems that you have to be coherent. You cannot move from here to here to here. You have to be consistent. If you assume that your research problem is something that needs discovery, then you need data that you can quantify and test. Then I move to the next level of philosophy, axiology. The axiology aims to answer to this question here. What is valuable, or what is the objective of what I'm doing? In positivism, it is valuable doing research because it will give you the power to discover, to predict, and to control. So as you can see, things that are related again to the scientific method, to be under control, to predict, to kind of do not interfere, all of these things. The opposite, it is valuable and doing research in interpretivism if in the end you end up understanding, learning about the context, learning about processes, not really about discovering. Sometimes in thesis, this is where things become strange. Like they say, I am trying to understand a socially constructed phenomenon. That's why I'm doing a case study. And the findings are that I identified three mechanisms, or I identified three factors that influence this. And it's like if you discover something, you are in the wrong side. You should have been here. That's a typical mistake that can affect your grade in your thesis. So be careful with that. Always stay in the same paradigm. And then another important question. This is a question that always comes when in the first meetings when we supervise. How should I write my thesis? Should I write in first person or in third person? And the answer is it depends on your paradigm. If you are following a positivism paradigm, you remember from this thing, the second dimension. You want to be far from what you're studying. You don't want to interfere. It's like a lab from high school. You want to be far. You want to control everything. So because of that, and to be consistent with that paradigm, usually uh, the positivism paradigm uses third person and passive voice. So probably like how you learn in high school, maybe. And then the opposite, if you want to be there, if you care for subjectivity, if it's important to show that you are there, then it's the opposite, write in first person and active voice. These are suggestions. We will go into more details later. There is a lecture where we discuss this in more detail, but generally it is like that. And then the methods. The methodological assumption, the methodology is another branch of philosophy in the end. And it also aims to answer what's the strategy that we need to follow, because methodology is a strategy. And in positivism, we will use quantitative methodologies. In interpretivism, we will use qualitative methodologies. Those are the extremes. And as you can see, the idea is to just follow the same path. Now it seems easy and or confusing because maybe it's still not clear. And don't worry, there will be more examples. But maybe you are like, it's very simple. I assume this, then I need this kind of data, then this is my finding, and I use this when I write, and I use this method. It sounds easy, but you will see that it can get complicated. You need to be careful. Or the opposite, maybe it is easy for you. Maybe you are very smart, but you have to write it to show the reader what you are doing, that you convince the reader that this is the path that needs to be taken. So I think we're done now with this important section regarding important assumptions from philosophy. Now we will move to more aspects of this discussion.